Hey there, Youest You family listeners. So excited to be with you today. And I'm really excited. Oh my gosh, I'm so looking forward to this conversation and for you to get to know my guest who is just an amazing human being on many levels. So let me tell you a little bit about Jacob first. And then what I'm going to recommend is you get yourself some time and space. You could be walking, you can be chilling, but you're going to want to tune in and really listen. And as you know, I do take notes. Just check out the show notes. So I'm going to encourage you to just sit back and allow this conversation to seep in. All right. Today we are joined by Jacob Cooper. Jacob is a clinical social worker, certified Reiki Master, and certified hypnotherapist who specializes in past life regression therapy. He works privately with clients through online services, and he is inspired by his own near-death experience and transformative encounters. He facilitates spiritual awareness and empowerment through life-changing seminars. Currently, Jacob resides and practices in Long Island, New York. He is the author of Life After Breath, published by Waterside Productions. I am really excited, I must say, to just dive into both your book, the near-death experience you've gone through, and what you think is the learning, the lesson, and what we can do. Because I know anyone, if you're listening, I know that you're sensitive, empath, and you want to make a difference on this planet and you want to shift your consciousness. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts about what we can do today to really shift and lift our consciousness as well. So, just a few subjects, Jacob. So happy you're here. Thank you for being on the You-est You show.
Thank you so much. A true honor to be here with you, Julie. Thank you.
I also want to just say a quick thank you to Alyssa Schwartz, who's a mutual friend and who was on the podcast about probably 6 months ago or so with the Soul Center. She is beautiful light and introduced us. She's like, Julie, you've got to know Jacob. And when I looked up your information and your book, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a definite, connection. So I want to thank Alyssa, and I'm grateful that we get to be here today.
Oh, that was a wonderful referral. I really have to thank her too. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's get started with, I think we go right into your near-death experience. For those who may not know, those are also referred to as NDEs, because we'll be using that term. This is something, for most people, I would imagine, I thankfully have not had one. Most people listening probably haven't had one. So maybe just to take us into that experience and how that shaped who you are and what you're about, and anything you'd like to share about that.
Sure. For those of you who are unfamiliar with near-death experiences, the coin was really, mainstreamed by Dr. Reremember, who, is on the cover of my book, endorsed my book. In his groundbreaking, research book, Life After Life, he coined the term near-death experience in 1975. But, prior to Raymond, people were having this, whether you look at, Greek times or biblical times, so the near-death experience is nothing new, but it's made a lot more headway as we've seen a lot more people from, conventional backgrounds or, medical fields and stuff like that, just regular everyday people or even left-brained, types of people having this experience that really literally blew their minds. And I think really the near-death experiences, it's part of it is to not hold on to the experience, but rather to allow people to have empowerment through it and to see themselves in your experience, much like any spiritual master, any transformative experience. But myself, it's a little bit diametrically different than the average, familiar with, let's say groundbreaking ones like Dr. Eben Alexander. Again, he was, Harvard, neurosurgeon, neurodoctor, stuff like that. And he was like middle-aged when he kind of had his. And, mine is a little bit different in a sense, that I was such a young age. I was 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at a lot of these near-death experiences, whether it's Eben or Betty Adie, who, wrote, the groundbreaking book, Embraced by the Light, or Anita Marjani, who endorsed my book too. It's many times as people middle-aged, they have this, life and they had this experience and they can't ever look back at reality in the same sense.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a lot different chronologically than, conventional ones that you hear in the media.
Yeah. I realize you were young, but 3 years old. So some would say you don't even have memories till you're 4. So
Right.
this is really interesting because you were so young. And I know that it's had a big effect in shaping what you do today. I'd love to also talk about your work with, with past life regression and what you're learning and what you're seeing. Can you share with us? So did you grew up in Long Island as well? You grew up in New York when you were younger?
Yeah, born and raised here, and I live here today and have a practice here. A lot of my work is, beyond New York. I do a lot of different groups. In fact, the next 2 weekends, I'm going to be in Connecticut at different, facilities, and it's sold out, and I'm very blessed with that abundance. But I'm making my rounds.
Awesome.
So,
So tell us a little bit, Jacob, about what happened when you were 3, and I'm so curious how much you remember at that age. To me, that's profound. Yeah, maybe walk us through what happened and how that's shaped who you are today.
oh. So it was September of 1993, which giving my age away a bit. And I'm my own biggest skeptic. I didn't like you. I didn't think it was possible to have recollection at that young age. If you look at earlier interviews, I would say I was 4, I was 5. Then, last maybe 2 years ago, I sat down finally with my mother and had a conversation about it. And
Right.
she told me I was 3 years old, and it just even blew my mind that I was that young. I thought, okay, maybe 4, 5. So, I'm my own biggest skeptic too within this, and that blew my mind that I was this young, because it just felt like a second ago that I had this. I didn't, you know, near death experiences will tell you the illusion of time. But at the
Mm.
time, it was September of 1993. It was right before, the Jewish high holiday of Yom Kippur, which is, a very sacred and holy day, obviously preparing oneself, one's soul to meet the creator for, manifestation of the new year, to kind of write a new slate and stuff like that. Little did I know I was going to meet the creator. It just wasn't in my own temple. It was, it was an inner creator that I was meeting, an inner God that I was connecting to, not to the outer God. But I had at the time something called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, which for young kids, children, or even rare cases like adults could be fatal or very damaging. I know, and I do believe The Light Between Us, Laura Lynn Jackson talks about her bouts with whooping cough and how, damaging that was. So a lot of adults even have impacts by it. But my impact was with whooping cough was something that led to my own suffocation. I went to a park with family friends. My parents weren't there at the time. I guess I had a cough, but my parents didn't think it was, that bad to just not have me stay home or stuff like that. They didn't know that I had this. They had no idea. But then in going to the playground with my sibling, I began to cough, and which led to a period of suffocation as I was climbing up a ladder. And the last rung on the ladder, after I was climbed, everything just stopped. Um, I had no oxygen. There was no breath that I was having. Everything was just pulled. And so it's kind of like you're driving a car and you're trying to rev up the engine. The engine's not working. So it's kind of pointless to be in the car unless you want to listen to a good song on the radio and stuff like that. So for me, I got out of my car, or out of my body, just kind of look in at a disembodied state as to what was happening. And from that point, in disembodied state, I was able to have a lot of understanding of the body and the different functionality, different components of it. But I also saw, much like a power breaker in a basement, that all parts of my body weren't functioning properly, that they were stopped. And, there wasn't anything going on due to deprivation of oxygen. And the last part that I became aware of that I could see and feel was my own brain. And from being disembodied, I was able to look at my brain and understand so many different components that I wasn't privy to at 3 years old today, or probably if I went to a neuroscience kind of track. So it just shows you that we really do use a very small percentage of the brain to understand the brain. And so sometimes it's a lot of a higher heightened senses that have more awareness than the brain itself. But my brain literally, due to the deprivation of oxygen, snapped in half, and I felt a large crack as if you have a plug that's in a wall, and this plug is your spiritual self plugged into the wall, the physical self, and all of a sudden, it's taken out of the wall, and I was just kind of left in this period of limbo where I wasn't in my body and I wasn't out of it, and I just was kind of, in this place in between. And then moments later, I had conventional experiences of near-death experiences like Raymond outlines and life after life, where I had a tunnel sensation. I was awakened to the light within. And moments later, I was able to become aware of what I could best describe as my own vibration. Just kind of, you have the AM and FM in this plane, and I was just going above the AM and FM into just a whole new frequency. And it was just this ride to an uh, infinite heightened awareness, where there was no possibility of this euphoric sensation, and there's no limitation of how good or how high or how far I could soar within this moments. And then, moments later, I was aware of my body that was still there. So I was able to snapshot between, going on off into other planes, as well as aware to my own body. Behind the right side of my brain, which corresponds to our own creative side, I became aware of this beautiful golden palace with lights that was just so powerful that I couldn't look at it, and was quite familiar. And in looking at it, it just almost felt like the apex, this endless apex of reality as we know it, where there was no end to this climax. And the best way I could describe that, this euphoric sensation as the center of all that ever is and ever was, would be God. And to me, it was just, looking at the center point of creation, the center point of all that is and ever was, and something that emanates and flows from this eternal light. And it was so profound, it was so powerful, that I had to really shield myself, because it was something so diametrically different that I was exposed to at the, even going through 3 years old, that it was um, a bit of an accumulation process. It was an incubation period of adjustment. Moments later, I became aware of, kind of like this bronze kind of gold color that was just, in the distance. And I became aware of this just whisper on the other side. And that whisper to me was just a frequency where it wasn't, let's say, Jesus Christ in front of me. It was more of a Christ consciousness or Christ vibration that I was there, that was able to really put me in this state of eternal comfort. And at the time, I still had um, awareness to the life that I was living, and I was worried about my parents and leaving that life behind. And, so I was in a state of worry or sadness of leaving that. Moments later, and being in this comforting, enveloping, healing space, I was put into this clear understanding that all was always well, all was always will always be well, and all is well. And the best way I could describe this was this eternal knowing that all is well. And with it wasn't something that I tried to force or create, but I was in the presence of all is well. And there was no time, there was no space in linear terms. It was just this unconditional love of all is well, where there wasn't a worry, and any worry that I had was burned away from being in this energy field. And moments later, I was aware of my body that was able to be manipulated and pushed down by my own spiritual guides on the slide. And then I was able to become aware of my own two guides that were there with me to the right side and left side of me. They were a male and female guide, and they were just massive, and they were incredibly, the colors that I saw from them and the sounds and vibrations were so different than anything that I could describe here. But the only way I could describe them for people to understand in words and vernacular would be spirit guides. But they were just beyond words, as was God. And in seeing them, I felt a great deal of embarrassment that I forgot that they were with me the whole time. And it felt like a grand reunion of something that I knew that was with me the whole time that I lost sight of. And moments later, I saw that my body was uh, just on the ground, irresponsive to anyone's call. And I became aware of all the people around me, that went to the park, on that day. And in looking at them, I was able to be aware of my body, but that body was just a meat suit, and to the side of it was my own energy field, and I could feel my own form. And in looking at all the people, I saw their physical form, but beyond that, I was able to see their true self, their true nature, and I became so aware of who they were, and to much more than what they presented to me, and much more than just their linear age. I became more aware of the totality of their inner being. And in that moment, it dawned on me that everything is divine and spiritual. Some people remember it, as Plato would say, some people drink less from the waters of forgetfulness, but at our essence, you take an orange out and you squeeze the orange out, you get orange juice. You take us out, squeeze all of us, it's unconditional, eternal love. And to me, I could describe that as something that is spiritual, true to form. But a moments later, I became aware of an endless sea of angels that greeted myself during this time. And the angels were literally right in front of me. They weren't in some far out distance. They were right there in the park. And it was just almost kind of like this filter of this infinite array of angels. And they looked exactly the same. They had the exact same intent, but they were just, just kind of like minions of angels, just multiplied, just the same, kind of like God's robot factory of angels in a way. And when I was seeing them, where the spirit guides had a lot more distinct characteristics. This choir of angels were all more uniformal, but they were uniformal in eternal love and unconditional love that didn't have any expectations of anything back. They were just here to serve and remember, that love. And they were just sending it, through this endless sea of angels. And, moments later became aware of my own, soul family that I was greeted by. And moments later, I was posed the most pressing question of my lifetime as to what would I do, and a little bit is this, highlighted more in Life After Breath, but would I stay, on the other side, or would I continue, this life of Jacob? And I just asked, what this life would become if I do stay. What was my dharma? What was this life about? And moments later, became aware of something I guess, you could describe as a life review, where I was given flashing images of not only this lifetime through the eyes of others, but I was also given awareness into, um, I think to me, it's all one life, but lives that you could say chronologically came before this. And the most pressing lifetime was the last lifetime in which I took my own life. And in that moment, I became aware of different students that I had in that lifetime. And I just became very emotional of remembering that period. And it's clear to me that I understood that from completion you begin. And much of my lifetime was so much about the allegory at the light at the end of the tunnel, and remembering no matter how much our back is against the wall, with whatever is going against us, there's something in us that's far superior inside of us. And re-remembering who we truly are was one of the gifts of this. And moments later, I saw myself speaking in front of a lot of people, being harbinger of this message that people needed to hear. And I said, as beautiful as the other side is, that's eternal. This is an infinite moment of time to be able to put in this message. And I said, I will have to turn down heaven, because to me, this is even more beautiful than heaven. And if we're able to elevate this, there's a lot less separation. Moments later, everyone, left, and I became aware of my spiritual guides. And I just had a lot of doubt that I was just almost kind of like kicking myself as to why I would do that, because as we know, it all sounds a lot better over there. And then reality sets in. You're like, oh my God, what was I thinking? And, moments later, my guides just left me with the powerful thought of really entrusting, spirit, entrusting your thoughts, entrusting your pathway, and know that your thoughts are a big influence on the life that you live. If you're true to your blueprint, or if you follow the blueprint of your own fears, or small sense of self, or, stuff like that. So I was left with, that profound message. And moments later, I was awakened on a hospital bed with my mom, visibly distraught. And, when people were trying to call my name at the park and I couldn't respond to them, that to me was just a continuity of suffocation, where I wanted to just hold them and shake them and tell them that I was okay. And I wanted to do the same thing with my mother, but I just knew that I just didn't have the words, the vernacular to describe what I had. It was just so beyond this realm and any word. And so to me, the suffocation lasted nearly 15 to 20 years, until I first was able to really integrate it and process it on an outer level, and be empowered to tell my story. But it's something that I really kept very much sacred, to myself, and I didn't tell a soul probably till around 15 to 20 years later almost, which is very congruent with a lot of child near-death experiencers. Some will tell them right off the bat, and others, will wait because it's such a sacred experience. So that's a little bit of a snapshot, but I know my book highlights a little bit more than that.
Oh my gosh, Jacob, I have a couple different questions that are like springing out of that, but that's incredibly profound. I mean, just completely profound. One thing that's so fascinating to me is we think, okay, you're 3, where are you developmentally? But when I'm hearing you talk about it, it feels like you left the I'm 3 and you moved into the eternal version of you. Because as you're speaking, and I know you're recounting it, and some of the things you mentioned, I'm like, this doesn't sound like a 3-year-old. This sounds like an eternal being who is in a 3-year-old body. Do you remember? Because I'm thinking like what language you had then. It's so amazing to me that that's what's coming up for me, is the eternal nature of who we are. You can hear it in your story. I don't know if that resonates for you.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's very easy for people to understand that we are an eternal spirit in a physical body, but to apply that to a child is, there's a gap in that. I think people think, okay, you get to a certain age, and I think it's the guitar and the guitar player, have a little bit more synergy with each other within this lifetime, but doesn't change the fact that there's this whole other inner reality that takes place just because it's not being shown or processed on an outer level. And I think really with kids, we look at them as very much on the surface, or what we see or what they display to us on an inner level. And as we know, there's so much more of life. And the majority of life does not happen on the outer, but it happens on the inner basis. Given that our life is ruled by 85% of our life is ruled by the subconscious mind, right? So much of our life is ruled by this inner reality. But so as a kid, it was very complex. It was almost kind of like I looked at a world like Benjamin Button's, if you're familiar with that movie with Brad Pitt, where we come to this world very old, and then we lose that part of ourselves, and we just forget that, and we become very young. And so there's a devolution there's an involution versus an evolution. It's so that takes place. And I think part of evolution is getting over what we've been taught about reality, and truly remembering who we are and what's there beyond what we've been taught, and to be empowered in that understanding.
So 2 questions about, I love what you just said. Very, very powerful. I'm curious a little bit about just seeing these sea of angels. It's interesting. I'd interviewed recently Rob Wergan, who's in the documentary Heal, and he had a story he shared here about seeing thousands of angels that saved his life, and does healing work. And I'm thinking, okay, now I'm hearing this again. And so curious what, for those of us that are like, what did that look like? What was it, light forms? Like what, you got to see that, or feel that, or sense that. Also curious how you reconciled this experience growing up, as you talked about, in the Jewish tradition, where it may not have gone against it, yet I'm not sure where there was space, just how was that for you? I know you talked about also not really talking about this. So I guess I'm asking 3 questions, but first, can you talk about what you talked a little bit about your spirit guides, and you can't even use words. It was just so magnificent. Did the Sea of Angels, did that have any specific form or kind of light, or did it look a certain way to you? For those of us who haven't seen that, what did that look like?
Yeah, when I was seeing them, there was almost like a minute where I just had to pinch myself, because they were just directly right in front of me. When we think of the other side, that's a term that we use, but I think the other side is very much this side too. It's just overlaying this reality. It could feel like a million miles away, but it's also right here. Because if you have a place that's a million miles away, that's a finite God with a finite universe. So we're talking about the infinite. So it's like asking to point to the internet. It's everywhere. We don't have to see the internet to know that it's there. We just know it's there. And so the other side is like that too. these angels were very young in their affect, whereas the spirit guides were older, and more developed and had a lot more human characteristics. The angels were very, infant, looking, very young looking,
Mm.
but they were floating very peacefully in the distance, and they were kind of like a brown gold color. And they weren't, the spirit guides were more micro focused, where the angels were more macro focused. So they weren't like, they were connected to me, but it wasn't all of, I wasn't like the star of the show. Like I felt like I was more looking at them than they were looking at me. I think they were just kind of looking in the distance, and it
Mm.
almost just felt like they were so above this reality. Because we think of this reality, everyone has like a distinct characteristic, or there's like a presence. With them, it, it was just this, there was just this light. There wasn't as much, it was so beyond anything that we're used to. Whereas like, we speak to people, they look at us, stuff like that. For these beings, they were just so beyond um, anything human in a way. That I guess you could say is an angel, but they were so different in how they operated and how they saw the world and their individuation. But
Mm.
they were just these messengers of light. And the moment I saw that is just something that I just knew that I carry with me wherever I go. I almost just remember that we have this reality, but right here, you just turn the radio dial up a slight degree. There's just so much going on that we don't see with the physical eye,
Yeah.
that's there. And so with the, how I grew up was, I love a saying that the afterlife and spirituality exists not because of religion, but despite of it. But if you look at, the old biblical texts, they speak of angels all the time. But, where I grew up, it was more involved in the dogmatic elements than it was,
Yeah.
in the meats and potatoes of this stuff. And, it wasn't, into, all of the glitz and glam of it. It was just more about, more of the rabbinic traditions and laws. And it was a lot drier,
Yeah.
than that. And that was something that was very unstimulating to me for
Yeah.
forever. I never bought into that, the dryness of God. I think it's something to me that it's eternally stimulating, not deflating,
Mm. I love that. Have you since felt or seen, you talk about your spirit guides, and my lot of reading belief is we all have them. We all have them with us from day one. Have you been able to connect with your spirit guides since then? Do you imagine them with you? Like, what's your relationship with the spirit guides like now? Your spirit guides, I should say.
Yeah. I love the Wayne Dyer story, and Wayne's a guy, a guide of mine that I really connect to. But in one of his talks, he would say there was, once a boat, and there was two men by the seashore, two people by the seashore, and they saw the boat, and one person turned and said, "That boat is gone." And the other person had a long pause, and they said, "Well, no, it's not. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it's not as strong or as beautiful, or it's just going on to a different journey. It's going on to another place. But just because we don't see something with the physical eyes does not discount that it's just as strong and as beautiful. It's just going on to another place." And so to me, I look at that, way of kind of like the afterlife in a way. Just because we don't see with our physical eyes or don't feel it as strongly doesn't mean that we can't have a knowing, that these beings and loved ones are all around us. And so for me, the spirit guides, I had a clear vision of that boat right in front of me. Moments later, I lost direct physical sight of it. You know, it's like I did in my near-death experience. But for me, I have different droplets of connectivity to my own guides. It's just on a different level, a different frequency, because I'm not out of my body. And so if we were to have all these experiences, and what would be the point of being human? I think part of it is, yes, we have expansiveness, but if it's so expanded,
Yeah.
then why, send it to matter in the first place? I think part of this is
Yeah.
we have to have that little bit of human part to us, and that spirit part of us. We came here to do both. And when we
Mm.
fully cross over, there's just pure windows without walls, as Rumi would say. There's just clear sight, clear awareness. And we could have snippets of that and glimpses of eternity within our lifetime, and as we evolve, hopefully that grows. But to have that full, throttle extent all the time, I would say we're living over there more so than here. And I don't think that's what we came here, for this
Mm.
life about, you know. We
Yeah,
came here,
really.
I think, to integrate that in this reality, not to evade it,
Yeah. It's a great point. it's a great point of that integration of living as a spiritual being in a human body, in a human existence, and having that harmony and that balance. I am curious, you talked about the suffocation extended to 15, 20 years. And maybe to talk a little bit about, that deciding to start talking about it as you go, in your book, The Life After Breath, but what helped you, what instigated that choice to tell people? It sounds like for you, and maybe you can say more, it was so sacred that maybe you didn't want to share about it. Tell us more about that journey.
Yeah. Well, after this, obviously through all the trauma that my body and my brain went through the suffocation, I was very changed. I mean, my brain literally felt like it cracked in half and God came in, as the saying said. And so going through preschool, I had this glimmer of light that was, constantly going through my brain. And I was very much connected to the other side on regular basis, particularly in moments of solitude and quiet. I would cross over to the other side on regular basis. And one moment that really changed me was I was having a conversation with one of my classmates, and I was, seeing beings on the other side and stuff like that. And I turned to my classmate and I asked, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" And they just look at me with the most perplexed look, and as if I was from Mars. And in that moment, I just knew, even further, that this was different, that the world forgot this, and it was a very isolating, suffocating feeling. And I think I was brought up in a quite a left brain Western society, and so as a young kid I was very much struggling in school, and it was very hard for me to relate and to focus. And so I guess for me to survive, I just had to bog that beach ball down, in order for me to just keep up with the pace of this, reality at hand. And but once I got out of high school, there was, a world just kind of opened up, and that, allowed me to just have a lot more autonomy and freedom. And, I think to thrive, I needed to learn how to make sense of this experience that I just tried to run from, but I couldn't hide from. It always somehow came back to me in moments of quiet that I had this experience, but I just, kind of like if you watch the movie The Hereafter with Matt Damon, he's just running away from his mediumistic, abilities in the movie. He just wants to be a regular guy. And for me, I was kind of like that. I wanted to run away from all this and just push it away. But, eventually it just kept on following me no matter what I did. So as a kid, I had a lot of premonitions, and I wouldn't call it psychic phenomenon. It was just all these things that I saw that came true that I just saw was a nuisance. And when it happened, it was just very frustrating because I just wanted to just live a life and not know what was going to happen and have all these premonition or deja vu sensations. But reading a book by Betty Eadie that was gifted to me by a family friend changed everything. From reading Betty's book, I never heard of the term near-death experience, so that something so profound that I had could be put in a diagnosis or a lexicon. For me, it was just something that I thought I was the only one who had this. And when I read Betty's book, it really gave me a firm understanding of universality behind this. And I was able to understand. It was frustrating in a way because I thought that I was kind of like Harry Potter, and I just had this incredible secret inside of me that no one else had, in a way, with this experience. But on the other hand, it was very cathartic to have a label to name it so I could tame it. And I understood that the various different experiences that I talk about in Life After Breath, that there was supposed to be a ripple effect behind this experience, that it wasn't supposed to be a book that collects shelf, the book that collects dust in the shelf, but rather the book literally and figuratively that's meant to be open and processed by the people from this experience.
And with this kind of cracked open ability and as you said, the light pouring through, is this something today you still have premonitions and ability to connect with the other side? Is that something you lean into and still have? Is that continued on your life since you were 3?
Yeah, I don't professionally call myself an intuitive or channel stuff, but I use it a lot, within my own counseling. I think there's intuitive, intuitive counseling and stuff like that. And I use it as well within my own hypnosis work and Reiki work. But essentially everything that I have and that I try to do is try to give back what I was given. In moments of pure suffocation, I was given the pure light and pure inspiration of eternity.
Mm.
And when I had nothing to hold on to, and I was, at the, the place of eternal suffering, it was the very low eternal abyss that I was experiencing. And so my goal is to give that back to other people, what I was given.
Mm.
And to me, as beautiful as the other side was, being at that place where there was nothing to hold on to and then being shown almost everything, it to me was the most climactical healing experience that I just wanted people to have in their own unique ways and touch and taste that in their own different ways in their lifetimes.
So it's a great segue. The question I have is, so how do we, those without NDEs, how do we taste and connect to the eternal? What are some practices that you can share? I think this community is, we're into, I call it, living your most authentic life, your You-est You, raising consciousness, whatever you'd like to share, Jacob. I know we're all, I feel like I'm listening and everyone here, I can tell you we're listening. What have you seen that really helps and works and connects at that deep eternal level?
First of all, I think for me, I look at the playbook of consciousness and transformative experiences a lot from my own experience. And I guess for myself to transform, you have to be vulnerable. And for me, I had no choice, right? My body shut down. This wasn't a choice, but other subsequent transformative experiences, a lot of it is vulnerability, which leads to a stretch of the soul. But I do believe in order to find yourself or to expand your sense of eternal self and eternal awareness, you have to be willing to lose whatever conception you have of yourself in reality, which is vulnerable. Because I think of eternity and infinite, it's infinite expansiveness, and every day is another opportunity to look at yourself in the nature of reality in an evolved way, and to put the tire on the pavement as much as we can to lead to practical change. But I like what Thich Nhat Hanh says, if you're familiar with him, from Plum Village, and I know people who are interested, you can look at his Netflix work. He's had decades as a profound leader, spiritual leader on the planet. But Thich Nhat Hanh said and I believe I'm paraphrasing, but in the waters of the still mind and still heart, the truth will present itself. And the closest example of that I could give is, as cliche as it sounds, is meditation. I mean, for me, getting quiet is a deep intimacy with eternity, because I do believe when you're getting quiet, you're getting past, the thought, emotion, and just this sense of your personality and its limitation. And you're getting into expanded sense of self, past the body, past the chronological age that you have and the personality that you hold on to get more in touch with your infinite book versus the current chapter that you're on. I know mindfulness really focuses on the current chapter, but meditation in general allows you to take a step back and to really expand your ability to connect on a deeper level. And, it's great because when you do meditate, you just know that there's just this sacred eternal observer that can never die. You know that there's parts of your body that will go, that there's parts of your personality that go. But when you touch this, you know that there's just this eternal part of you that you'll carry that exact observer. You're just what the presented nature of reality will expand in front of you, but you're in touch with you on a very deeper level. It's just what's in front of you is expanded. And the idea is to match your own light with the light of, what you were created from, the light of the other side, so that there's no difference, with yourself. And you're kind of like the angels. You evolve further and further to come back into that eternal form of light.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful, Jacob. But so I know before we wrap, I did want to ask about, you do past life regression, and maybe talk for a moment about that. My understanding now, I don't even know how to explain what I've read and heard and align with, is the idea that we often have lived hundreds of lives. And so are you able to talk a little bit about past life regression and what that looks like, and maybe just your perspective on that and anything you'd like to share? Because I think that's such a fascinating topic.
Sure. Maybe I'm misquoting, but Deepak Chopra would say, we're here to evolve from burning away our karma so that we could really live our dharma. And I think so many people, are blocked from their true self because they're holding on to their stories, they're holding on to their personalities, and all that's happened to them but at our core being is a sense of purpose, to really have a ripple effect, and to not be defined by the story, but to define the story, in our own way, to not be defined by the narrative, but to define the narrative. And I think past life regression allows us to understand the very simple notion that we are so much more than our bodies, that this isn't just a mere existence to pay the bills. It's not random, but in fact, this is incredibly highly processed, highly developed, and it's a brightly guided life. And the intelligence, that was a part of our lifetime and the life between lives is infinitely greater than our own understanding. And so I think for a lot of people, it's to understand their own dharmas, it's to understand their own sense of purpose, to understand who they have been, to understand where they can go. And I say, if you don't know who you are, you could be anybody. If you don't know where you're going, you could be anywhere. So allowing people to really tune into the GPS of their souls, so that they could live with a lot more grace and ease versus force, and their power could create more power. Where force depletes itself, power continually expands. And so I think it's very empowering for people from the ground up.
Beautiful. So before we wrap, I like to always ask this question. I call them heart flares, where your heart is like, I have something to say that maybe I didn't ask you yet, or just tuning into the collective. Is there a message or a thought or heart flare that you would like to share with us? Yeah.
Sure. I think I first of all had to thank you for having this conversation. It's just so needed, as a therapist and someone who's in the field, and just being alive, right now, and we could all just look in front of us and feel and sense a lot of separation. So conversations like these are the oxygen of our times. We need this. This is what allows us to really propel forward, because we need a stable foundation to encounter a lot of these strong winds that we're enduring. But I think, if anything else, it's for people hopefully listening to this, that they are able to look at themselves, hopefully their children, in the nature of reality in a different context, to understand that this is a guided life. There's so much more going on than we could ever even imagine, and to really fall in love, not with the results, but rather the process. Albert Einstein would say the most important question that we have to answer within our lives is the universe a friendly place and working with us or against us? And I think part of the near-death experience is to gain a lot more trust and rapport with, the light inside of us, with God. And it could be so easy to lose faith if we just look around us and just all the disconnect that people have. And I think obviously we can't control other people's actions, but we could use that as an impetus of fuel for our own fire to really connect to something deeper within. And when you burn everything away, that's all that is left. And who we loved, who we were loved by, and what we were able to create a difference. And so I think it's more important for people to focus on being right or wrong versus how could we find ways to live a little more empathic society and to be agents of change, and to understand love as the ultimate collateral, as a life that we lived, and our ability to rise that energy and that force, as truly that's all that ever is and ever was. I think the more that people are able to remember that, the more we can get over the illusion in front of us to remember the truth and live by that inside of us. And I think if we could do that, heaven and earth will not be diametrically different places. Rather, much like I saw my near-death experiences, they are, all connected. They all are a part of each other. There's no this side, that side. It's all just one expression of the eternal light of divinity.
And so it is. That is so stunning what you said. I feel like someday we'll do a part 2 and all the ways to start, although you're doing this, I think this is what we're doing here. Like you said, in this conversation, is to start bridging that and really getting, there is no other. There is no other.
There's no other. And for those of you also interested, I do have my book, Life After Breath. It is on Amazon. And, I think I had my experience in a playground for a reason. We're all just children playing here in God's playground, here as our brothers and sisters keeper. And my hope is that this book could allow us to remember our responsibilities to one another, not to work against another, but to work with each other. That's the only way to survive.
Jacob, thank you so much. And we will make sure to have your book and linked it, and
Thank you.
just welcome and invite everyone to get your book, Life After Breath, and just love the work you're doing. You so clearly are living it and being it. And thank you for, I'm so grateful that what just came to me is so thankful that you chose to come back, that you chose to come and embody humanity and be here, because we certainly, this is so needed, what you're talking about, teaching what we're discussing today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Stepping into this. And I want to thank you, my beautiful Youest You listener, friend, family here, that thank you for being with us and for listening and taking what Jacob said and really, really sitting with this, that there is no other, that the divinity, that light that is in you now, that there are thousands of angels that you may not be able to see with your eye that are around you, that we have these guides around us, that there is a possibility of bringing in heaven here as humans with being spiritual at the same time. And Jacob, thank you so, so much.
An honor. Thank you so much.